Thank you very much.
Yes. It is World Refugee Day. What exactly is the main topic today? What is the main talking point? I know there's a world refugee crisis globally. Kenya, we also have our own issues with refugees. Today is World Refugee Day. What exactly is our headline today?
The main headline today is, as you said, there is a huge refugee crisis in the world. Since the creation of the United Nations, we've never seen so many refugees in the world. There are more than 60 million displaced persons, forcibly displaced persons around the world. That includes refugees, but also IDPs. So every year on the 20th of June, the world commemorates refugees. You wouldn't say celebrate refugees, but commemorates. We want the whole world to know about refugees, to know about their plights, to know about what they are about and what the issue is.
Now, when you come to the Kenyan issue, and of course the government has said it's shutting down the Dadaab refugee camp, and the UNHCR really took time before commenting on that assertion by the government. I know last week the president, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta, was in Belgium, and he had an opportunity to meet with the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and even speaking after that meeting, the UN Secretary General said, yes, okay, you can go ahead, but just do it humanely. What was the thinking behind all that? Behind the scenes, between when Kenya said we are shutting down and the UNHCR took its time in commenting, what really happened? How did you come to the agreement? Okay, fine, I think we can do it now.
The UNHCR commented immediately, in fact, because the first information or first decision by the Kenyan government was on the 6th of May. That at that time there was an announcement made by the PS for Interior. I think it was on a Friday, and on the Monday UNHCR commented, saying that it understood the fact that Kenya is one of the countries in the world which is receiving the largest number of refugees, but it also underlined the fact that the repatriation operation has to take place voluntarily and in conditions of safety and dignity. So there was an immediate reaction from UNHCR. And since then, about a week ago, our High Commissioner, Mr. Filippo Grandi, was in Kenya last Sunday. He met with President Kenyatta, and they discussed about this decision that the government of Kenya has made. And the position remains the same, which is that there is a full understanding of the fact that Kenya is the second country in Africa when it comes to number of refugees, seventh country in the world. Kenya has done a lot of sacrifice to receive refugees, to provide protection to them, and there is an understanding of the fact that Kenya wants to see the world do more for solutions. Our position remains that for repatriation to be sustainable, if you don't want people to come back, the return has to be voluntary. The key issue in the situation of Somalia is to make sure that the conditions in their places of origin, access to basic services, access to education, to healthcare, are there. And if these conditions are there, that refugees will be able to return humanely in conditions of safety and dignity and voluntarily.
But even prior to the government deciding that now we're going to go ahead and shut down the Dadaab refugee camp, there was already an agreement for voluntary repatriation of refugees through the tripartite deal between Somalia, Kenya and the UN. And already a number of refugees had voluntarily gone back to Somalia. How is the situation right now for the 6,000 who went back? So that probably, is it encouraging for the rest to actually decide to go back home? How is the situation there?
There are actually even more refugees who have returned. If you look at the refugee numbers that we had back in 2011, when we had the last influx of refugees from Somalia as a result of the drought and the famine, we had at that time about 420,000 refugees, a bit more to 420,000 refugees in Dadaab. If you look at the population now, it's about 320,000. So we've seen a spontaneous return of about 100,000 people since then. And following the tripartite agreement that you just referred to, we have also supported the return of about 14,000 refugees. So the issue is that would more refugees want to return? The first thing is that all refugees want to return home. There are no refugees who don't want to return to their place of origin. The issue for them to return is back in Dadaab to go back to school. The most important thing for her was to get back to school. So if you are facing a situation like that, what we need to do as international community, for somebody who has been able to go back to Somalia, is to make sure that this person will have access to school, will have access to healthcare, will have access to shelter, will have so that's what needs to be done. And the decision, the call made by Kenya will definitely help us mobilizing more resources for the international community for that.
Now, to a layman just sitting back and thinking, okay, well, there's a camp on the Kenyan side holding more than 400,000 refugees, and it's becoming a burden to Kenya. There's security concerns raised. Why is it possible just to transfer the camp to the other side of the border and have them at least on their side of the border?
There are two things. First, in Somalia, you already have about 1 million IDPs, internally displaced persons. So adding to that would not necessarily the best thing. The second thing is that if you force people to go into a camp on the other side, the chances that they will come back are extremely high. So what we need to do is to make sure that they go back and that they live normally. Either they go back to the places they left some years ago, or they go back to new locations which can be home for them. To have them into another camp will result in them moving again, and that's not what we want. We want a return and a durable solution, and making sure that they can go back to their place.
Okay. Because 400,000, you must admit, for a country like Kenya, that's a huge number. And probably what people are wondering is, apart from the Al-Shabaab threat, which has been largely contained with the help of AMISOM and KDF in there, what's the biggest challenge right now for UNHCR in leading this repatriation of refugees? I'm sure it didn't come according to your timelines, because in 1 year this tripartite agreement had only managed, through the tripartite agreement, it was only about 6,000 people who managed to move back, 14,000 in another year. What's the biggest challenge in now handling this mass exodus of refugees back to Somalia?
First, we hope it will not be a mass exodus. I think it has to be an ordinary and humane return. It has to be orderly, and it has to be humane if we want it to be sustainable, because this is what we want to happen. There are places in Somalia where there is stability and security, where refugees would be able to go back to, and this is what we are going to do to support the return of refugees to these places. Jubaland is one of the parts of Somalia where most of the refugees come back from, and we know that a number of them could go back to these places. Besides making sure that there is security, and I said in parts of Somalia there is stability and security, is to make sure that they will be able to restart their lives, to restart normal lives. So it's to call on the international community to provide massive resources for, as I said, healthcare, for education, for livelihood, to make sure that they can resume their lives. So the challenge is to, I would say, mobilize the resources that are needed for them to live normally.
Okay. And for World Refugee Day today, what exactly what activities are you engaging in today in Kenya?
We'll be engaging in a number of activities. We will, this morning, we will be at the National Museum. We will have a number of guests coming. We will have, and as you may know, there will for the first time be a refugee team going to the Olympic Games, and this team has been supported by Tegla Lorupe, whom I'm sure you know. So she'll be there. We'll thank her for what she's been able to do. There'll be a member of the diplomatic corps. There will be government officials, and more importantly, there will be refugees who will show their art, show the diversity of their culture. Kenya has more than 15 different nationalities as refugees here in the country, and there will be an opportunity for them to perform, to show. So it will be a celebration of and acknowledgement of the sacrifices that Kenya has done, that the Kenyan people have done, to thank Kenyan people for having received refugees for such a long period of time, and also to thank the government for the role of protection and assistance that it has played so far.
And you mentioned that, of course, we tend to focus a lot more on the Somali refugee burden, if I may call it that, because the numbers are huge and probably because of the history we've had. But you say Kenya has played host to quite a diverse number of refugees from different countries. What are the other unique problems apart from the Somalia problem? Because I know the South Sudanese are still there, and a number of even Ugandans and Rwandese.
There are indeed South Sudanese, and we've seen, unfortunately, following the most recent conflict in South Sudan, more South Sudanese coming, but they are in the country. They've been well received. We are trying to see also, they are in Turkana for most of them, and we're trying to see how to provide support and assistance in a different way. For a long time we've been providing assistance in camps, humanitarian assistance in camp. So how can we economically integrate the host and the refugees? So this is a challenge that we are trying to handle. But there are also other refugees, as you said, from Uganda, from Rwanda, from Burundi. Kenya, since independence, has been receiving refugees from all over the region. And what we hope to do in our collaboration with the government is to make sure that it continues, that Kenya can continue to be the fantastic host that it has been for refugees.
And as we wind up now, because there's a difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee.
Yes.
I probably explained that to us. And when it comes to refugees, because in Kenya we've hosted the Somali refugees for 25 years, is there a duration that is standardized, maybe under the UNHCR, under the probably other agreements under the UN? Is there a specific duration of time that you say, okay, fine, you can be hosted by a country as a refugee for this long, then after that your status needs to change? You either become integrated into that country or you go back home. What happens?
On the issue of asylum seekers and refugees, you are an asylum seeker until you are given asylum by the country which has received you. So most of the asylum seekers, or those seeking asylum here in Kenya, have been granted asylum, so they have become refugees. On the issue of the duration depends on the situation in your country of origin. The number one solution when you're a refugee is to go back to your country. So you are a refugee until you can go back to your country. But there are situations where, as you say, they are integrated in the country where they are. The most recent example of a large case of reintegration was of local integration was in Tanzania, where Burundi refugees who had been there for 30-40 years were given citizenship and stayed in the country. The third solution that we have is resettlement, in cases where refugees are sent to other countries where they are being received. So these are the solutions that we see. So there is no real duration. What we hope, of course, is that the refugee situation does not last. Unfortunately, around the world now, the average duration of a refugee situation is between 17 and 20 years. So that's a result of the crisis and war that we have discussed about.
For Kenya, having hosted these people for 25 years, were you hoping, was there hope that probably we were heading towards integrating them into Kenya?
You know, when somebody is forced to leave his or her country, what you should hope for him or for her is that he and she can go back. And if he or she decides later on to go back, to come back here, it's a different thing, but that at least you can go back to your country, reveal yourself of the protection of your country is very important. Finding yourself where you've been kicked out of your country because of a conflict and then being forced to stay there forever is not something that you can cope. What we're hoping is that the situation in Somalia will allow most refugees to go back to their place of origin. What we're also hoping in the future is that rather than to have refugees in camps, we will have refugees economically integrated. We also believe that it will strengthen their ability to go back to their place of origin and then help rebuild their country. We had, in the case of the South Sudanese, many of them came back to Kenya. They've been in camps for a very long period of time, and they came back to Kenya simply because they couldn't cope back in their country. So while you're in exile, we have to make sure that we maintain the knowledge and expertise that you have, or that we even strengthen. A lot of refugees here in Kenya have been able to go to school, to go to university. They go back to their country, they can help rebuild their country, and that's what we're hoping for.
Any parting shot?
to thank you very much for having me, and to remind and tell everybody that refugees are people like you and me. We shouldn't see them as either terrorists or people who should be feared. It can happen to any one of us to find oneself in a refugee situation, and it's important that countries like Kenya continue to be champion in providing protection and assistance to refugees.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That has been Rauf Mazu, UNHCR representative to Kenya, helping us to discuss the refugee crisis in the world and in Kenya in particular, because of course, you know, the government has announced that it